So this is a continuation session of where we left in the other class. That was about Black Friday and the discussion around the analysis of the script. So drawing from there, primarily when we look at screenwriting ideas from news stories and real events. What are the key features or what are the key points when we try to develop a screenplay or write a screenplay? How do we draw inspiration or draw ideas from news stories or real events that happen in and around us or in different parts of the world? Uh, so what you tend to do is largely when you're picking up a news story or a real event as a source material for developing screenplays, essentially what you're doing is you are trying to retell the story. So something that has happened already, you are narrativizing it or you are trying to tell it to someone else. Many times it so happens that everybody doesn't have those sort of ideas. Everybody um, kind of are glued on to hear stories that they have not experienced, and we keep telling stories um, to our friends, our families. Sometimes we tend to hear from others what has happened, and these are real life account of you know um, of stories and people. So what we tend to do is we follow them with a lot of keenness. So here you are doing the same thing. Only thing is here you are trying to write it down in the format of a screenplay. So while you are structuring it or developing it in the form of a screenplay, you are still trying to retell a story that has already happened, and a news event or a real event as a story. Um, the couple of examples which should help us get a better illustration of what I'm trying to talk about here. Um, there are a few Hollywood examples, few examples from the Hindi film industry. Uh, American Gangster, you're familiar with American Gangster. American Gangster is a film that was based on, loosely on, it's kind of a biographical sketch, but what is interesting about or important about American Gangster, why it gets featured as an illustration here, as an example here, is it also tries to document the time in which this character lived, or how the society was during that period and what all event that happened while he was operating at that point in time. So you are not just trying to do a biographical sketch of a person, which you would also find in a lot of other stories, but drawing nuggets of information from real life events that has occurred in this person's life, or when he or she was operating, the kind of incident that would happen. So those things which were constantly getting reported in the newspapers. So you are trying to basically pick up several stories from the newspapers and trying to thread them into one while developing the screenplay. Then Argo, Ben Affleck's Argo, or American Gangster would be Denzel Washington's um, Argo would be Ben Affleck's Argo, again based on real life event drawn from newspapers and magazines. Dog Day Afternoon. Dog Day Afternoon was is a classic story of how as a screenplay idea was picked up from a newspaper article about a robbery that happened in the daylight and how it was planned and what all happened. So we're almost giving a first-hand account of uh, how this incident could have occurred at that point in time. Dog Day Afternoon also went on to win Best Adapted Screenplay award, I think, at Academy Awards. Then Spotlight, which was based on how church engaged, Few higher officials in the church, including the priest, engaged molesting and uh, engaging in child sexual abuse for such a long period of time, and how um, two journalists went on to track the story and did follow-up investigation about the story and tracking the perpetrators. So these are few examples of screenplays that are brought in or written based on news events or real events that has occurred. In Bollywood, one film we have already screened and discussed, that is Black Friday. Similarly, there is Madras Cafe, which was written by drawing ideas from news articles and magazine articles about the ethnic violence that persisted between Tamil Nadu and Sri Lanka, about the Sri Lankan Tamils and the ethnic violence that occurred and the political intervention that led to the assassination of late Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi. So, told in a very dramatic style, but following the investigative zeal of how journalists would go and try to, tell you a narrative story. No One Killed Jessica, based on the Jessica Lal murder case. Again, giving you a narrative account of who all were involved, what all happened, trying to almost retell the story. Again, drawn from 4 or 5 magazine articles. So that gives a foundation to the screenplay. Then Talwar was based on the RC murder case, which became very infamous in Delhi. So then Bandit Queen is there. Bandit Queen was again a biographical sketch of late Fulan Devi, who was a former dacoit turned MP of Madhya Pradesh. Now you will have numerous examples and illustrations of um, films or screenplays based on real people, events, their lives and stories. Um, those are largely drawn from the, the narrative style writing, or what we call as narrative journalism, drawn from the kind of news stories which gives you uh, analytical, you know, understanding of particular event or events, what we call as long form investigative articles. This is not just a small 500-word news story. I mean, that can also become an inspiration, maybe to a short film, or if you want, add a few more um, threads to it and dramatize it. That's why you would also come across many films that say that based on real events. Um, so when you say based on real events, you are uh, not necessarily following one story. That could be parallel stories that you're following and drawing upon and threading things up. So it really depends on the creativity of the screenwriter, the scriptwriter, how they want to tell that story. The prerogative and the politics of the screenplay writer and the director or the creative team, so to say, um, gives us a better reflection of how this a particular film or a story unfolds in front of us. Um, whether it's an actual depiction of an event or it gives you an overview of a particular incident or events, would depend on the treatment or on the writing part of it, how you are trying to tell the story. Many a times what happens is people try to stay truthful or stay uh, um, close to the real incident or the event that has happened. So what they do is they try to tell the story in a chronological fashion. So most of the stories follow a chronological recounting of the events in a narrative format. Where to say chronological recounting as events progressed. So if it's a story about a Miami gangster in the 60s to the 90s, now you trace the entire story of 60s to 90s and how the society in Miami was, or how the neighborhood was in Miami, and how this person has grown up. Something that you would notice in, um, Francis Ford Coppola's Godfather also. It's a, you see a very interesting perspective about how the society of that period was, as and when it changed from, Don Corleone time to, um, Don Corleone's time to Michael's time. So that would give you some sort of an understanding about how chronological progression happens in a narrative, and why it is crucial, because the audience are used to this pattern. I can break the same thing and try to, do the do this part of, um, to try to do this part of trying to tell it in a non-chronological fashion, what you understand as hyperlink narratives, or narratives um, which are, non-chronological in nature, or drawn from told in parallel ways. There are four stories that are concurrently running, and then you don't follow a linear pattern of telling a story. So it depends. It largely depends on how you want to tell the story. So it's clearly on you as a screenplay writer. Um, and of course, you have to eventually, the director has to approve of this, or producer or the creative team has to approve of this kind of a writing. But it depends on how you want to tell the story. Then the emphasis is on real people involved and their POVs. Okay. Um, Most of the times when you talk about news events based story ideas, you need to tell it on people who existed. Now, this could be a banker, stand-up comedian, cook, um, photographer, gardener, criminal, fraud. They have to be based on real people. Now, how real you want to present or portray would define how you want to tell the stories. Are you trying to tell a certain story from the point of view of that particular person? Or are you trying to tell the story from a point of view of the investigating officer? Are you trying to tell the story from the point of view of his family members? Because each of them, try and understand, would have a certain kind of version of it. If I am trying to tell a story purely drawn from a newspaper article, then I am basing my story on the point of view of that journalist. Whether that journalist has done an authentic job or not, you would not be able to qualify the statement unless you do a cross investigation about that story which is published in X newspaper or Y magazine. So, how real you want to um, depict or in your story? How much of reality you want to depict in your story? That would tell you. You want to dramatize it, borrow elements from that news story and try to dramatize it completely, make it into a commercial mainstream narrative, you can go ahead and do that. You want to stay close to reality or give people a real world feel of how this has happened, then you try to do a lot of research, and then even while dramatizing, make it sound as authentic as possible while retaining the entertainment value, while without becoming didactic or preachy, or trying to take a stand about a certain character or characters. So it's the point of views that matter. Remember, at the end of the day, you are trying to understand and interpret a real life event that has occurred. Now, in the timeline, how you want to tell the story, whose point of view, perspective you are trying to take, and who is going to get more space in your story. Um, most of the stories, most of the cinematic stories uh, have crime-based backdrops. The real events are based on crime-based backdrops, and it's interesting in that sense because for the longest period of time, what has happened is people tend to, be thrilled by crime-based stories. Crime is something that brings a different kind of romantic imagination with people, and it it is a different kind of a reflection of society. It's pathological in treatment. It offers some sort of, a reference to the kind of times that we live in, what we understand as zeitgeist. Zeitgeist is that of thrill. The zeitgeist is that of um, your romance for noir. A French term that is used for mostly crime-based stories called film noir. So it's basically dark films. So most of the stories have crime-based backdrops, and we tend to uh, kind of look at it from a point of view, a psychological examination, so to say, of the characters or the times they lived in, or so on and so forth. Then documentary versus dramatic style treatment. Okay, documentary versus dramatic style treatment is something that, as a screenwriter, you need to keep in mind while developing screenplays um, which are based on real events or news events, so to say. When I say documentary versus dramatic style treatment, what I mean is, do you want to develop a docudrama? Do you want to completely dramatize it? So it's the treatment that would matter. When you look at a Black Friday versus an American Gangster, you would know that American Gangster has used more dramatic treatment style elements than a Black Friday, which is written and told and made more from a docudrama point of view, using real life footage, so blending in the reality with the film or with the drama. So there is actual footages. Like for example, you would see that in Narcos, the Netflix series. The first season of Narcos had so much of news footage juxtaposition, like you would see in Black Friday, about the real life event. For example, the flight crash sequence that is there in Narcos, they immediately cut to the real news footage that existed. So it teleports the audience immediately to that space. That's why documentaries matter. Documentaries are a great deal because it gives you almost spine-chilling account of things that has happened, which are reported or documented by real people. So how you want to write that, it depends on you, whether you want to do it this way or use the dramatic treatment style in order to write a conventional narrative. Then research is key while developing, developing ideas which are based on news events. It adds perspective and layers to the narrative. Uh, as much research, you know, uh, people take years and years of research. People have research teams in pre-production, at pre-production stage, to gather enough and more information, because the more information you have, the more perspectives you would have, and the more layers you can add to the narrative. Your scenes will unfold very fluidly, very naturally, very organically when you have a lot of research materials at your table, writing table. So you are basically developing a thesis. In thesis, what we do when we do research is we gather information and then we put them together. Similarly here, this is what you are trying to do when you are developing a screenplay based on news events or people from the reality. When you are doing background research, when you are doing psychographic and demographic profiling and studying and trying to read into their lives than just touching upon the surfaces of their lives, you are adding values and layers to your own film. And it happens so organically and fluidly that at the end of the day, when you have a 100-page script, whosoever goes to, they know that you have done meticulous research and that research gets reflected in the story. Which is why Black Friday works as a narrative or as a film based on real event. That so much of research has gone, so much of material has gone into it, that it's not a superficial picture of something that has happened. That in order to titillate the audience or in order to just give a thrill to the audience, we are doing no. Our job is to kind of create a sense of awareness or kind of develop some sort of an opinion based on this sort of investigative narrative that you're offering. So whether it is individuals or communities, everybody is going to judge your material from that point of view that you're presenting. So the more layers to the narrative, there's a smarter way to write those things. So again, it depends on whether you are dealing with the commercial format or you're doing art house festival format. So whether it's a studio project, whether it is an independent project, how much of independence you have in terms of your writing and presentation. If you're writing for somebody else, it would be different than writing for yourself. So right at the script development stage, as a screenplay writer, if you're developing stories based on news events, if you do location visits, which is called as Reiki, you get a look and feel of how this place is, where this incident has happened or this event has happened. Is it just a street? Who lives across the street? How many people saw this? Is that CCTV footage, actual location CCTV footage of that day when this event happened? Is it summer or winter? Is that road deserted? Was that street light non-operational or fused at the time when this event happened? How much of traffic happens on regular day in those places? Is it close to a forest? So all these things would come up, all these questions would come up in your mind. Then interviews of families and relatives, friends and neighbors, many times that works, tremendously, because everybody would have their own version of the story, on which is what is interesting. So take sound bites or take notes, whichever way. At this point in time, all of you have smartphones. You can take audio notes and do audio interviews, come back and transcribe them so as to see who all said what about that person or that incident or that event. Everybody would have their own aversion to it. And after listening to all this, you can develop your own perspective around that. Who is close? A person, somebody, let's say, for example, if there is a particular criminal, but he has been helpful to a particular community, that community would look at him and give their perspective favorably, or they're going to talk mostly positive things about this person. Whereas if you are interviewing anti-parties or somebody who was a competition in the business or somebody who is at the other side or the opposite side, is going to give a negative feedback about that person. So how to balance this up and what sort of whose perspective you are going to take up. All those things will come handy and they will be extremely useful as a source material for writing when you are developing screenplays based on news events. And these are very potential tools to help you graduate from a rookie writer, somebody who has started screenplay writing today, to a seasoned screenplay writer who is in demand because he or she can develop an interesting, very plot and narrative rich, document that could be eventually used to make a film. So that's more or less what I wanted to share about ideas drawn from news events or real life people uh, in this topic. I'm stopping here. Thank you.